And we're back.
And we're back.
Last watch of the day,
Okay, so-
I think, is the IWC. So what is this?
So that was produced from 94 until 1998. There's less than 1,000 that have been made during this time, and that's IWC under Günther Blümlein. If you search the guy, he was just an amazing industrialist when it comes down to watches. He's the one who saved Jaeger-LeCoultre and IWC from bankruptcy. He's the one who, together with Walter Lange, restarted Lange & Söhne, so incredible guy. And under his stewardship, IWC was just producing these incredible references in the 90s and the very early 2000s, and he very sadly passed away, in late 2000.
We take these things for granted, but it takes visionaries, to
exactly.
bring brands together.
Yeah, and they were doing this because they're like, ceramic is great because it doesn't scratch. It's tough and doesn't scratch. The problem is it's more brittle, so if you dropped it on the floor, it would have a very big shock, then it would chip or break. But that on the table is probably okay. But it's they were doing this, and it was a flop commercially, because that watch was sold 50% more than its stainless steel equivalent, and most people probably thought it looks like a swatch from a distance, right? It looks like plastic, and therefore it completely flopped. So they did less than 1,000 over a 4 years period, and then they decided, that's not going to work. And
the flops of yesterday are tomorrow's
super
super winners.
Yeah, and it's very true in Rolex world. If you're looking at like the Milgauss 1019 that nobody bought at the time, or even the first generation of Explorer 2s that everybody was like, it's useless because it tells you, whether you're in the night or the day. But if I look through the window, you can probably know that pretty safely. So they did this. It flopped. It became rare. But at the time I bought it in 2006, you only found a few, but the market was not crazy for them. And I bought it from a guy called Michael Friedberg, who is a lawyer out of Chicago, and he used to be the moderator of the institutional IWC forum. So if you went to IWC website, and they have a forum for IWC enthusiasts, he used to moderate this for a very long time, and he was selling it. And I saw that, I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's not something you see every day, and I really liked the fact that it was tough, scratch proof. The patina on the dial and the hands was just beautiful, and it wasn't super expensive.
That's patina. That's not Fortina.
That's not Fortina.
All right.
That's a real thing. And I think I paid $4,500 for it at the time, so it's not cheap either. But I'm like, it's just so cool, and it's just so uncommon.
It's a lot of watch for the price.
And what you have inside, it's a Valjoux 7750, but extensively reworked by IWC. They change a lot of pieces. They regulate it.
Yeah, it's a Valjoux.
It's a Valjoux.
Feel it
the wobble, right? But it's fantastically well executed. The details on the dials.
Yeah, they don't put
everything.
the base model, the base caliber.
No, they don't.
We're going to rework everything.
No, they take the highest grade that they can, and then they refinish it, and then they change a number of parts as well to.
And there's a date.
Yeah, so it's just a good workhorse of it does what you want it to do. That's an interesting watch as well. It's 60 meters water resistance, meaning that if you were falling in a swimming pool at a cocktail party, it would not be ruined.
Which happens every time.
Which happens every time, of course. It's I thought it was nice, and I really liked what IWC stood for at the time. They were quite austere. It's quite Germanic. It's one of the only Swiss brands that is in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And it's very Germanic in its design, very restrained. all the watches of that time, at least. Then when Blumlein passed away and Georges Kern took it over, he just completely bastardized the brand, and I've got no time for what he did at the time. I know that he was well rated by his masters at Richemont because he was selling a truckload of watches, and that's probably the aim of every business, but I don't think it should come at the price of completely perverting the brand's DNA, which is what I thought happened in the 2000s, and they're just coming back from those excesses. Like IWC, everybody followed Panerai's cue. When Panerai became popular, everybody's like, yeah, we need to make big watch because that's what people are buying right now. And if you took a catalog from IWC from the late 2000 or 2012, pretty much everything was above 42 millimeters.
Yeah.
Maybe you had one or two watches which were 39 or 14. Everything else was 42, 45, 47. And I'm like, unless I'm missing something, not everybody is 7 feet and tall and 300 pounds, right? We're still, humanly sized. Not everybody's the Hulk. So anyway, back in the day, that was made. That's 39 millimeters. The one thing I hold against this watch, it's quite thick. It's
the value.
It's not just the value. It's because it's got a soft iron cage inside that isolates it from magnetic fields. So it adds more thickness because of that. So if you look at this technically, so you've got a chronograph. It's 60 meters water resistance. It's anti-magnetic as well because it's got this soft iron cage. In terms, it's scratch proof. So in terms of sports watch, it's a bit tough to beat something like that. But even if you were not going for the ceramic version because they're so difficult to find and they're now super expensive, but even if you bought that in steel and they've got a wonderful metal bracelet on it, that I think is one of the really underrated buys that you can find in the market. They're going for $2,500-3,000 US dollars.
Which years more or less?
Oh, the 3706 was probably produced from the mid 90s until probably 2005, 2006. So it had a 10 years run, and then they came out with a bigger one. Obviously, they went from 39 to 42,
right,
and then from 42 to 44. Anyway, but it's still wearable. It's a bit thick, so it's not going to fit under a cuff particularly well, but it still wears really well. And if you find the steel one on a steel bracelet, again, it doesn't have an adjustment at the clasp, which would drive me nuts. But if you find one and it suits your wrist, it's a wonderful bracelet as well. Very easy to take the links out. The mechanism to do that is really great. But that's, for me, is a completely underrated reference, the steel one. That, on the other hand, for the longest time, I bought it at 4,500, and for the longest time it was between 5,000 and 6,000, and nobody cared about them because it was this obscure reference from the 90s, and nobody cares about the 90s because everybody's either in super vintage or in completely contemporary ones. But it's about, I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was an article on Hodinkee. I think there was, 2 articles on Hodinkee, and from that moment on, the price just skyrocketed. And now you can't find it for less than 20,000 US dollars, 25 perhaps for the full set. And yeah, it's just hype, right? So Hodinkee said it's cool, so everybody thinks it's cool, and the price explodes. So that's just what's happening on those references. If people are in the market for a nice looking sports watch from a top brand, they need to revisit the catalog of IWC from the mid 90s to the early 2000s. There's just so many good stuff there. There's the IWC UTC, which is a 2 time zone watch as well. I have one. I've lent it to my father. I can't show it here, but same thing, 39 millimeters, not as thick as this one, probably 13.5 millimeters. So it's reference 3251, if I recall. And it's just a great watch. The same thing, it's got a decent enough water resistance at 60 meters, anti-magnetic, 2 time zone, great design, great looks. That's a great watch. The IWC Mark 15 is another one, a bit smaller, a bit thinner at 38 millimeters, and they look absolutely great. So even they had this line which wasn't as well loved at the time, called the GST line. So what they had is they had the Aqua Timer 2000, so 2000 meter water resistance, which is in titanium or in steel. The titanium is probably better because the steel version is extremely heavy, but that's a fantastic watch. You have a couple of GST chronographs that look so much better in life than they look in the picture. Same thing, 7750 movement, refinished.
Well, speaking of integrated bracelet, would you go for one of the Ingenieur
Why did I buy this watch?
of those days?
So the Ingenieur, you've really had 3 periods for the Ingenieurs, right? So you have like the ones from the 60s, which were sold either on the steel bracelet or a bead of rice bracelet. I think reference 666. There's a few references from there, which are really nice, very vintage, acrylic crystal. Then in the 70s, you had the Ingenieur, whose style is very similar to something that Gerald Genta would have done. And I think the story is that there's kind of like a myth that it was done by Gerald Genta, but it wasn't actually. So I think it's Genta-like rather than full Genta. Then in the early 2000s, they came up with a revival of the Ingenieur, but these were really big watches. They were like 42 millimeters, super thick, super heavy as well, on steel at least, a bit better on titanium. And then the watch you just showed before, which I thought was this. I came very close from buying this or the black one you showed before, that they produced for a period of time, I think around 2010-ish, which is a 40 millimeters case, integrated bracelet. It's remarkably thin. I think it's got to be below 12 millimeters or just thereabout, and fantastic. So yes, ETA movement inside, but great watch. This I would get easily. It's been discontinued, but this I would easily get this watch. This is cool. I find that very, very cool, and I would use this exactly in the same way as I would the Explorer 2. It's a great daily watch.
What I don't understand is that when every brand goes for the Gerald Genta integrated bracelet thing, and IWC had one of their own, they redesigned the Ingenieur this way.
So this is, but this is the biggest joke, and this is why I hate Cairn so much.
What on earth?
But hang on, they did this. So hang on. If you look at this, it's not too dissimilar from the Ingenieur from the 60s, which were also coming on a leather strap, right? So the face looks relatively similar, the hands and all that. It's 42 millimeters, so it's really big. But what they did is, because they were so proud of having their own in-house movement, with the Peloton mechanism, that they put a transparent case back, and therefore it's got zero anti-magnetism property, because for it to have it, you would have to have a soft iron cage around it, and you would need a solid case back. So they've got it's just like I don't know, Rolex comes up with a Submariner that's not waterproof. That is what that watch is. It's a joke.
It's a bit like the Luminor Douai.
Yeah, so it's
Panerai.
exactly. It's like you make a Panerai whose entire DNA is about diving, and you make one that you can't take to the water. It's just very bad.
Well, things happen.
Things happen. They do. But again,
You don't have to buy it if you don't like it.
No, you don't.
But
But
look at this one. So, you never know. Put this on your radar, because maybe not everybody is hip everywhere in the world about what this is worth now, thanks to Hodinky. And yeah, if you're smart, just pick up one of those reference from the early 2000s, late 90s, and just send a message to Ben Clymer
no,
or Forrester. Try to hit the watch and have
No,
them write an
just-
article about it.
But just a word of advice with this. You buy this kind of stuff, not this because now that's collectible, but the ones I was mentioning before. Well, you buy this because you like the watch, not because you think it's going to appreciate in value.
Absolutely.
And you just have something that you enjoy. And I think that this is what the hobby is about. You don't have to
But
flip
it's been
watches
working
all the
for
time.
you with the IWC, with the Tudors. So
Well,
it does show that don't buy the hype, because usually you're too late on that train. You just find quality.
But you buy something you like, and you kind of hope that other people will like it, and therefore if you have to sell it, someone will like it enough that they'll buy it from you, and hopefully you're not losing too much.
Cool. Well, that's it for us today. Thank you for watching,
Well, thanks a lot for having me again.
and thanks for having me. And thanks to Fisher.
Thanks to Fisher.
All right, guys. Bye bye.